I stopped confessing because every confession stole something from me except the one I never made. I learned early that my confessions were dangerous things, not because they were dramatic or loud, but because every time I offered my heart honestly, it slipped through my fingers and landed somewhere it didn't belong, usually in her hands. My best friend Mira had an effortless glow, the kind that made people look at her twice without knowing why. She never tried to steal anything from me, she didn't need to. Things simply found their way to her, like they had always been looking for her. The first boy was in middle school. I practiced my confession for days, rehearsing it in my head until it sounded brave. I told him under the staircase where no one could hear. He smiled awkwardly and thanked me. 2 weeks later, he was holding Mira's hand during morning assembly. I remember watching them from across the courtyard, my chest feeling strangely hollow. The second boy laughed kindly when I confessed. He said I was brave. He said he liked someone else. 3 days later, Mira showed me his messages, asking her out, apologizing for the awkward timing. She looked guilty. I smiled anyway. By the third confession, I stopped crying. By the fourth, I stopped hoping. By the fifth, it became a pattern I pretended not to notice. Mira always apologized. She always said she didn't mean for it to happen. I believed her, and somehow that made everything hurt more. So I stopped confessing. I let my crushes rot quietly inside me until they either disappeared or grew too heavy to carry. Silence became safer than rejection. That was when I noticed him. His name was Arav. He sat 2 rows behind me, always near the window, always writing something instead of listening. Teachers ignored him because he caused no trouble. Students ignored him because he didn't ask to be seen. I didn't ignore him. I just didn't think he belonged in my story. Until one afternoon, when my notebook slipped from my hands and spilled its contents across the classroom floor, papers scattered everywhere. Before I could react, he was already kneeling down, helping me gather them. His hands moved carefully, as if each page mattered. One of the papers wasn't mine. It was folded, filled with neat handwriting. I didn't read it. I didn't need to. My name was written at the top. I paused just for a second. He noticed and gently took the paper back, his ears turning red. He apologized softly, saying it was stupid. I shook my head and told him it wasn't. He didn't smile. He didn't explain. He simply nodded, as if that moment meant more to him than he was allowed to show. Later, I learned something important about Arav. He hated confessions. He believed that saying things out loud ruined them, that love should exist quietly, safely, without witnesses, and somehow that made him the most dangerous boy I had ever met. I didn't tell anyone about the poem. Not Mira, not my friends, not even myself, not properly. I folded the moment away like it hadn't happened, like Arav's handwriting hadn't burned itself into my thoughts for the rest of the day. After that afternoon, I started noticing things I had somehow missed before. The way Arav always arrived early and left late, the way he chose seats where no one would sit beside him, the way his notebook was always open, pages filled with words that never seemed meant for class. Sometimes I caught him looking at me, not staring, just glancing quickly, like he was checking whether I was real. When our eyes met, he looked away immediately, as if he'd been caught doing something wrong. I told myself it meant nothing. I'd learned not to trust patterns. Patterns had hurt me before. Mira, on the other hand, noticed everything. She noticed how boys looked at her, how teachers smiled more when she spoke, how rooms shifted slightly when she entered them. One afternoon, while we were walking home together, she nudged me playfully. "You've been quiet lately," she said. "New crush?" I laughed too fast and shook my head. "No, just tired." She studied me for a second longer than usual, then smiled and let it go. Mira never pushed. She didn't have to. The next week, something changed. A boy from our literature class confessed to me after school. He was sweet and nervous and rehearsed. I listened politely, nodding in all the right places, waiting for the familiar disappointment to settle in. I told him I wasn't interested. For the first time, I didn't feel guilty. 2 days later, he was laughing with Mira by the lockers. I didn't feel surprised. I felt numb. That afternoon, I found Arav sitting alone under the old banyan tree behind the school. He was writing again, completely absorbed. I don't know what came over me, but I walked toward him before my fear could stop me. He looked up, startled, like he hadn't expected the world to interrupt him. "Hi," I said. "Hi," he replied, softer. We stood there awkwardly until I asked what he was writing. He hesitated, then closed the notebook. "Nothing important." I smiled. "You always say that." He looked at me then, really looked at me, and for a moment it felt like we were the only two people breathing. "Important things don't like being explained," he said. I sat beside him without asking. He didn't move away. We didn't talk much after that. We didn't need to. Silence felt different with him. It wasn't heavy or uncomfortable. It felt intentional, like something we were both choosing. Before leaving, he said something that stayed with me long after. People ruin feelings by naming them too early. I wanted to ask what he meant. I wanted to ask who had hurt him. I wanted to ask if any of his poems were about me. But I didn't, because for once, I was afraid that speaking would break something fragile and new. And I was starting to realize that maybe the most dangerous love isn't the one that's rejected, but the one that's never confessed at all. It started with a look. I noticed it before anything else. Mira was talking about something ordinary, complaining about a teacher or laughing about a boy from class, and her eyes drifted past me. They landed on Arav, sitting a few desks away, his head bent over his notebook. She frowned slightly, not in interest, in curiosity. "Who is that?" she asked casually, as if she hadn't already sensed something different. I followed her gaze even though I knew exactly who she meant. "Just a quiet guy. He writes a lot." Mira hummed, thoughtful. "He looks intense." I shrugged, trying to sound careless. My heart didn't listen. After that, she noticed him more. Not in the way boys noticed her, openly and eagerly, but the way Mira noticed things that might eventually matter. She asked his name. She asked which classes he was in. She asked why he never talked. Each question felt like a small crack, forming somewhere inside me. Arav and I didn't suddenly become close. That would have been too obvious. We just kept finding ourselves near each other, sitting on the same bench during free periods, walking the same stretch of road before turning different ways, sharing quiet glances that said more than words ever could. Once he let me read a poem. Just one. It wasn't labeled, it wasn't explained, but it felt like standing in a room where someone had left the window open just for me. I didn't tell him how it made me feel. I was still learning how to exist in moments without trying to claim them. Then Mira did something unexpected. She spoke to him. I watched from across the courtyard as she smiled at him, warm and effortless. She asked him about his writing. He looked uncomfortable at first, shifting his weight, glancing around like he wanted to escape. Then she laughed, light and familiar, and something in him softened. I told myself I was imagining things. I told myself this was different. Arav wasn't like the others. He hated attention. He hated confessions. He would never fall for someone just because she was beautiful and easy to love. But that night, I couldn't sleep. The next day, Arav avoided me. He didn't sit near the window. He didn't write during class. He didn't meet my eyes. When I tried to speak to him, he nodded politely and walked away, like we had never shared silence under a tree or poetry without names. I found him after school, my chest tight. Did I do something wrong? I asked. He looked tired. No, you're different, I said quietly. He hesitated, then spoke without looking at me. Some things are easier when they stay distant. The words hurt more than I expected. Later, Mira mentioned him again, her voice light. He's interesting, she said. Complicated. I smiled because I'd learned how. Inside, something old and familiar began to ache. I realized then that this wasn't about confessions anymore. It was about patterns, about whether some people were meant to be chosen loudly and others only in silence. And I was terrified that history was about to repeat itself. Only this time, I was already in love. Mira didn't mean to hurt me. I reminded myself of that constantly. She never chased what was mine. She simply walked into rooms where affection already existed and let it find her. Still, every time she mentioned Arav, my chest tightened. He barely talks, she said one afternoon, tying her hair up as we sat on the steps outside the classroom. But when he does, it's like he's choosing every word carefully. I nodded, pretending this was new information. She smiled thoughtfully. I think he hates explaining himself. I almost laughed. Instead, I stayed quiet. Arav stopped sitting with me altogether. When we crossed paths, he offered polite nods, nothing more. The silences we once shared now felt like locked doors. I wondered if Mira had said something, or if he was simply protecting himself the only way he knew how. One evening, unable to hold it in any longer, I messaged him. I asked if I'd done something wrong. The typing dots appeared, disappeared, then appeared again. Finally, he replied, I'm not good at being noticed. I stared at the screen. I never noticed you because you were loud, I typed back. I noticed you because you were there. There was a long pause before his response came. That's the problem. He didn't explain further. The next week, our literature teacher assigned a group project. Fate has a cruel sense of humor. I was paired with Mira. Arav was assigned to our group as well. The first meeting was painfully awkward. Mira did most of the talking, naturally. Arav listened. I watched the way he relaxed slightly around her, how her ease made space for others. I hated myself for noticing, for measuring every look and pause. At one point, Mira excused herself to take a call. Silence fell between us. You didn't tell her, Arav said quietly. I frowned. Tell her what? That I write about you. My heart stuttered. You never asked me to. He nodded. I know. I just needed to be sure. Sure of what? That you wouldn't turn it into something else. I wanted to scream that it already was something, that it had been from the moment I saw my name written in his notebook. But I stayed still, afraid that honesty would chase him away again. After Mira returned, Arav barely spoke. When the meeting ended, he left quickly. That night, Mira lay on my bed, scrolling through her phone. I think Arav likes me, she said casually, not looking up. The words landed gently, but they crushed me all the same. I waited for the familiar rush of disappointment, the resignation. It didn't come. Instead, something sharper rose inside me. He doesn't, I said, my voice steadier than I felt. Mira looked up, surprised. Oh, why do you say that? I swallowed. Because not everything that feels close is romantic. She studied me for a moment, then smiled apologetically. You're probably right. But I knew Mira. When she sensed a possibility, she didn't let it go easily. And as I lay awake that night, staring at the ceiling, I realized something terrifying. This time I wasn't willing to step aside quietly, because losing him without ever speaking felt worse than the risk of breaking everything by finally telling the truth. I spent the next few days rehearsing conversations I never had. Every version ended the same way, with Arav pulling away, with words turning into something heavy and awkward. I hated that my mind kept comparing this moment to all the others I had failed before. Mira didn't push the subject again, but I noticed the small changes. She asked Arav more questions during group work. She laughed a little louder when he spoke. She invited him to sit with us during lunch. He always hesitated, then politely declined. That should have reassured me. Instead, it made me more anxious. One afternoon, I found Arav in the library, tucked into a corner between shelves that smelled like old paper. He was reading, not writing. I took that as permission. Do you always hide here? I asked softly. He glanced up, surprised, then smiled faintly. Only when the world feels too loud. I sat across from him. For a while, we didn't speak. The silence felt familiar again, like something we had misplaced and finally found. I don't like confessions, Ting, he said suddenly. I know. They turn feelings into obligations, he continued, eyes fixed on the page. Once something is said, it expects an answer. I nodded. Some people need answers. He looked at me then. I'm not one of them. My heart pounded. What if the answer isn't required? He closed the book slowly. That's not how people work. I hesitated, then asked the question that had been burning inside me. Why do you write about me? He inhaled deeply as if bracing himself. Because writing doesn't ask me to be brave. I swallowed. And what happens if I'm brave instead? His expression changed, a flicker of fear crossing his face. Please don't. The words stung more than rejection ever had. I don't want to trap you, he said quietly. I don't want to ruin what this is. What is it? I asked. He didn't answer. That evening, Mira called me. She sounded excited. Arav agreed to come to the open mic night with me, she said. He's going to read something. My chest tightened. He doesn't read his work out loud. Well, she laughed. Apparently he might. After the call ended, I sat in the dark, my phone resting uselessly in my hands. I realized then that silence wasn't neutral. It wasn't safe. It was a choice, and it was choosing for me. The night of the open mic, I watched Arav stand under the lights, his hands shaking slightly as he unfolded a paper. His voice was quiet but steady as he began to read. It was a poem I recognized, not by the words but by the way it felt. And when he finished, the room applauded, but I couldn't move. Because for the first time, he had spoken aloud what he always kept hidden, and he hadn't looked at me even once. The applause felt distant, like it was happening in another room. I watched Arav fold the paper carefully, as if the poem were something fragile he needed to protect. Mira was smiling beside me, her hands clapping softly, her eyes shining with admiration. "That was beautiful," she whispered. I couldn't speak. My throat felt tight, my thoughts tangled. I had recognized the poem, not because I remembered the words, but because I remembered the silence it once lived in. It was the same quiet he shared with me under the banyan tree, the same careful distance he had started keeping lately. Arav stepped down from the stage and disappeared into the crowd before anyone could reach him. Mira excused herself, saying she wanted to congratulate him. I nodded, watching her weave through people effortlessly, as she always did. I told myself not to follow. I failed. I found them near the exit. Mira was speaking animatedly, her hands moving as she praised his courage. Arav listened, his shoulders tense, his gaze fixed somewhere just beyond her. Then she did something I didn't expect. Was it about someone? She asked gently. The question hung between them. Arav hesitated. For a moment, I thought he might finally say my name. Instead, he glanced at me just once, then looked away. It's not meant to be explained, he said. Mira smiled, accepting the answer easily. I like that, she said. Some things feel more real when they're unnamed. I felt the ground shift beneath me. On the walk home, Mira talked excitedly about the night, about how brave Arav had been, about how she hadn't known he had it in him. I listened, nodding at the right moments, wondering when my heart had become something I carried quietly for everyone else's comfort. A few days passed without any of us mentioning the poem. Arav returned to his usual silence. Mira returned to her easy charm. I returned to pretending I was fine. Then Arav sent me a message. I'm sorry you were there. I stared at the screen. Why? Because you shouldn't have heard it like that. I typed back slowly. Who was it for? There was a long pause before he replied. Does it matter? Yes, I answered. It matters to me. Another pause. Then, I didn't want it to belong to anyone. The answer hurt more than I expected. The next day, Mira told me Arav had asked her to coffee. Not to date, she insisted, just to talk about writing, about feelings, about how strange it felt to read something so personal out loud. I smiled. I told her that sounded nice. Inside, I felt something crack. I realized then that my silence had created space, and Mira had simply stepped into it without knowing. This wasn't betrayal. It was consequence. That night, I pulled out an old notebook and began to write for the first time in years. If Arav could hide behind words, maybe I could find myself in them too. I wrote about patterns, about quiet boys, about the danger of waiting too long. And for the first time, I decided that if I was going to lose him, it wouldn't be because I was afraid to speak. I didn't plan the confrontation. I don't think moments like that ever announce themselves. They just arrive when the weight of everything unsaid becomes heavier than fear. It happened on a quiet afternoon when the campus felt almost empty. I found Arav in the same place I always did when I didn't know where else to go. Under the banyan tree, his notebook open, his pen resting uselessly between his fingers. He looked up when he saw me and immediately closed the notebook. You don't have to hide it, I said. I'm not, he replied, but his voice lacked conviction. I sat down anyway. My heart was racing, but my voice surprised me with how calm it sounded. You asked Mira for coffee. He exhaled slowly. She asked me, actually. That didn't make it hurt less. I need to ask you something, I said, and I need you not to protect me from the answer. He tensed. I don't think I can do that. I looked at him, really looked at him, and realized how much effort it took for him to stay distant. Who are your poems for? I asked. Silence stretched between us. The wind moved the leaves above us, filling the space he refused to. Finally, he spoke. They're for the version of me that doesn't have to explain himself. That's not an answer, he swallowed. They're for you. The words landed quietly, but they shook me. Then why do you keep stepping away? I asked. Why do you let her get closer? He closed his eyes briefly. Because she doesn't ask for more. I never asked either, and I said. I waited. That's exactly it, he replied softly. Waiting feels safe. Confessions don't. I felt something rise in my chest, something between frustration and heartbreak. You think saying it ruins things, but pretending it doesn't exist ruins people. He looked at me then, really looked at me like he had been avoiding doing so for weeks. What if I lose you the moment I speak? I took a breath. What if you already are? The silence that followed was different. It wasn't gentle or chosen. It was heavy, breaking under its own weight. I don't want to be another pattern in your life, and he said, another boy who makes you feel invisible. You already are, I replied, my voice steady despite the tears burning behind my eyes, just in a quieter way. I stood up before he could respond. My legs were shaking, but I didn't stop myself. You don't get to write about me and keep me at a distance, I said. You don't get to decide alone what this is. As I walked away, I didn't know if I'd just ruined everything or finally told the truth. But for the first time, I felt lighter. Because whatever happened next, it wouldn't be because I stayed silent. I avoided both of them for a few days, not out of anger, but because I needed the space to let my words settle, to see if they would echo back or disappear completely. Silence felt different now. It no longer protected anything. It simply waited. Mira noticed first. She always did. You've been distant, she said one evening as we sat on my bed, the same way we had 100 times before. Did I do something wrong? I looked at her and felt the familiar guilt rise, heavy and unwelcome. Mira had never taken what she knew was mine. She had only stepped into places I had left unguarded. No, I said honestly. I just needed to say something out loud for once. She studied my face, searching for something. Is this about Arav? I nodded. Her expression shifted, not into defensiveness, but understanding. He's complicated, she said carefully. I know, I replied. So am I. She waited. I like him, I said. The words felt strange but freeing. I have for a while. Mira exhaled slowly. I wondered, she admitted. He looks at you like he's trying to memorize you. The admission stung and soothed me at the same time. I didn't mean to get close to him, she continued. I thought he needed someone easy, someone who wouldn't ask. I don't think he knows how to choose easy, I said softly. I think he just runs from what scares him. Mira nodded, then smiled sadly. He's not afraid of me. That night, Arav messaged me. I'm sorry, he wrote. I didn't realize how much I was hurting you by trying not to. I stared at the screen for a long time before replying. You don't get to protect me from your fear. I know, he answered. I just don't know how to be brave the right way. Bravery doesn't come with instructions, I typed. It just asks you to stay. The next day, Mira told me she had canceled coffee with him. He needs to figure out what he wants, she said. And so do you. I hugged her then, holding on a little tighter than usual. Patterns didn't have to repeat themselves. Sometimes they just needed to be interrupted. That evening, Arav asked if we could talk. Not by message, in person. We met under the banyan tree again, the place where everything quiet had begun. I'm tired of hiding, he said, voice barely above a whisper. But I'm still afraid of saying the wrong thing. I looked at him and realized something important. Love didn't need perfect words. It needed honesty. Then don't confess, I said. Just don't disappear. He nodded, eyes softening. I can do that. For the first time, it felt like we were standing on the same side of the silence, not hiding behind it. We didn't suddenly become something definable. There was no announcement, no dramatic shift, just a gentle change in how we occupied space together. Arav stopped leaving when I arrived. He stopped closing his notebook so quickly. Sometimes he even let me read what he was writing. Sitting close enough that our shoulders brushed, neither of us pulling away. He still didn't say much, but he stayed. And I learned that staying was its own kind of confession. Mira watched us with an understanding smile. There was no bitterness between us, only the shared relief of honesty finally being spoken. Our friendship felt lighter without all the things I'd been carrying alone. One afternoon, Arav handed me a page. You can keep this, he said. It was a poem. This one had my name at the top, written clearly, without hesitation. My chest tightened as I read it. It wasn't about longing or distance. It was about presence, about choosing to remain even when fear whispered otherwise. You don't have to answer it, he added quickly. I just wanted you to have it. I looked up at him. This is an answer. He smiled then, not nervously, not cautiously, but fully. We walked together more after that, talked more. Not about the future or labels, but about small things. Favorite lines from books, songs that felt like memories, the comfort of being understood without explanation. Once I asked him what had made him hate confessions so much. He hesitated, then told me about a time he had said too much, too soon, and lost someone important because expectations changed everything. I thought silence would protect me, he said. I didn't realize it could hurt someone else. I squeezed his hand. Silence isn't wrong, I said. It just needs consent. He laughed softly at that. As weeks passed, I realized something had shifted inside me too. I no longer measured myself against Mira or anyone else. I wasn't waiting to be chosen loudly. I was choosing myself by staying honest. The pattern I had feared didn't repeat. Not because love had changed, but because I had. One evening, as the sun dipped low and the sky softened into familiar colors, Arav finally said the words I had stopped needing but still wanted to hear. I don't hate confessions, he said. I hate the way people expect them to be endings. I want this to be a beginning. I smiled, feeling calm and certain. Then let's keep it that way. And in that quiet agreement, without promises or declarations, love finally felt safe. I used to believe that love was something you announced, something you offered up like proof of courage. I thought if you didn't say it out loud, it didn't count. Every confession felt like standing in the open, waiting to see where the truth would land. Now I know better. Some love grows quietly, not because it's afraid, but because it wants to be understood before it's named. Arav never needed grand words. He needed space to stay without running, and I needed the courage to stop disappearing. When I look back, I don't see a trail of failed confessions anymore. I see a girl learning, slowly, painfully, how to stop handing her heart to patterns that didn't know how to hold it. I see silence that once protected others and harmed me, finally reshaped into something chosen. Mira and I stayed close. Our friendship changed, but it didn't break. She teased me once, smiling, saying she was relieved the universe had finally stopped recycling the same story. I laughed, realizing she was right. Some cycles only end when someone refuses to play their role. Arav still writes. He always will. Sometimes his poems are about the world, sometimes about nothing in particular. Sometimes they're about me. He doesn't hide them anymore. He doesn't rush them either. We never had a dramatic beginning, no sweeping confession, no moment that could be clipped and replayed as proof. What we had was steadier than that. We had mornings that started together, walks that stretched longer than planned, silences that felt warm instead of heavy. One day I asked him if he ever regretted not saying things sooner. He thought for a moment, then shook his head. No, he said, because when I finally stayed, I meant it. That was enough for me. If there's one thing I've learned, it's this. Love doesn't always arrive the way you expect. Sometimes it avoids the spotlight. Sometimes it waits until you're brave enough to stop chasing and start choosing. I was never cursed. I was just confessing to people who didn't know how to listen. The boy who hated confessions didn't need one after all. He just needed someone who would stay when the silence finally ended.